Rakrak asked the stingray what his terms were. What did he want in return? And once again reminded him that if he hid anything from him now, there would be no further conversation. The electric stingray flew closer to Rakrak, but now his fluttering seemed less violent than before. Still, he did not answer immediately and began from afar, explaining that he had been sealed in these ruins for many millennia. Jael, who hadn't heard this mental conversation, came up behind Rakrak and said that all preparations were complete and they had collected all the spoils, now they could leave. But now their leader didn't want to rush anywhere and told them to wait a little longer. Rakrak asked in thought what he meant by sealed. Then the stingray patiently explained to him like a child that it meant he was trapped or imprisoned here. And even though he could fly freely in this space, he could not go out of here. Finally he named his condition. He wanted to free himself from this restriction, and then he could give the power of electricity to whoever freed him. Rakrak immediately asked, "What would it take to free you?" He replied that it was simple, and if Rakrak went down and killed the guardian who was guarding the seal and broke it, he would be free and could give him his power. Rakrak wondered if he could then do the same thing the rat monster did. With the day's power the stingray would give him. The one laughed a little at the way he named his power and assured him that of course he could, and even more impressive things would be within his grasp. Now seeing Rakrak's interest, the electric stingray excitedly explained that this power is called electricity. Using this power, Rakrak would be able to perfect it and amplify its effects to the point of being able to summon a destructive thunderstorm on the heads of his enemies. This power could become so powerful that it would be comparable to that of the gods. But Rakrak didn't seem to understand what the stingray was telling him and only asked what else he had to offer. Then the stingray proudly announced that the power he possessed was so powerful and boundless that not only Rakrak himself, but also the members of his tribe could use it. But that was not all, this power could be passed on to their descendants. The progress in strength they had made would not be passed on directly, but if their descendants continued to train their strength some of them could become even stronger than he was. When Rakrak heard all this, he couldn't help but think how amazing it all was. But still he had a logical question: why was a stingray with such a marvelous and useful power trapped here? He answered without hesitation that it was because its power was too strong. And humans and other intelligent beings stay away from dangerous things like poison or monsters and anything else they don't understand. In case they can't stay away from them, they trap them and lock them there, and that's what happened to him. Suddenly Rakrak stopped him and warily pointed out to him that he himself had just said he was dangerous to others. Rakrak looked at him suspiciously and confidently stated that he was hiding something. And perhaps it was because there was more harm from the stingray's power than good. The stingray tried to argue that no, that's not true, and that if you have that power, then. Rakrak immediately stopped him and advised him not to lie anymore. And warned him that he could go back right now and block the entrance to this cave, which seems to have been blocked for no apparent reason. Then he could also order his warriors not to let anyone into that cave and warn all the descendants of my tribe to never enter there. Because of such threats, the electric stingray was clearly in a panic. The prospect of spending a few more centuries in prison did not please him at all. And there was no way he was going to give up. Rakrak turned around and pretended to head for the exit of the cave. The spirit of the stingray immediately followed him, begging him to listen to his story, for now he would tell him everything. As far as Sunwon knew, the intelligence level of spirits was not that high. However, it was not easy for those who entered the demonic ruins to resist the temptation of the spirits. Still, as expected, Rakrak behaved very cunningly because of his new ability he had obtained. This new unique ability of Rakrak was cunning. Sunwon decided that this ability was most likely due to Rakrak figuring out Shunan's tricks and being the first to successfully attack the frogmen. Rakrak still wanted to possess this power. So he suggested, why don't they start the deal again, PZ? Scat didn't understand who he was addressing, but Rakrak said that, from now on, that would be his new name. But he still resented it, saying he wasn't PZ. Rakrak insisted that their deal starts with him choosing his new name, and those are fair terms since the scat was trying to trick him. He had no choice but to agree. The next thing Rakrak asked for was an explanation as to why the stingray was dangerous. After all, he thought, if PZ really had a power worth making a deal for, there was no reason to hide why he was dangerous. If there was a reason to hide, however, then it wasn't worth making a deal for. PZ hovered in the air and agreed to take the risk of telling him that he was descended from ancient evil, or rather from creatures that had ruled this world many millennia ago. Rakrak wondered which ancient evil he meant. PZ answered that it was those who ruled this world many, many years ago, but it was so long ago that everyone had forgotten about their existence and even the gods did not remember them. Even he himself could not remember his origins, for he had simply opened his eyes one day and found himself trapped here, imprisoned for an unknown amount of time. However, to the stingray's surprise, Rakrak was not frightened by his origins and even more so said he felt sorry for him. He told him himself that he grew up an orphan and it's not that important to know what you were born as. It's much more important to decide what you're going to do with your future. PZ was a little discouraged at being comforted by Rakrak's words, but soon went on to explain his danger. A power of unknown origin intoxicates sentient beings. Since the source of the power is unknown, it allows the creature to believe that the power belongs to him alone, when in fact he obtained it by accident. Once he begins to use such power, he begins to believe that he deserves it, and if he begins to think so, he looks down on those who do not possess the power. Rakrak found this a little hard to understand at first, but he nodded, remembering the examples of Bor and Shunan, who were intoxicated by their power. Now he asked, demonic magic also causes creatures to become like that, right? PZ confirmed his hunch, indeed its power spread indiscriminately and unchecked. This meant that the wielders of his power were chosen randomly and that carried certain risks. Rakrak tried to predict what would happen to his tribe if he obtained this power. This electric demonic power seems to be different from the one given to their bug god. The god's power is only given to those he chooses and at his discretion. On the other hand, if someone gets this kind of power without having earned it, others will be jealous and envious. And if there are more and more of them, there will definitely be lizards who will despise God and turn away from him. Moreover, this power would only grow more powerful as time went on. Now Rakrak understood why PZ and his power were so dangerous. So he asked why he had to risk so much to gain that power. PZ insisted that his power was useful, attractive and would be able to give him an advantage in battle, but it was still destructive. Then another electric shock ran through PZ. Rakrak thought he had seen a light like that somewhere before, and finally realized what it was. It was like thunder and lightning in the sky. He assumed that the strength of the energy determined the intensity of the light it emitted. At first it might just be a small spark, but when the force grew and became stronger, it could turn into thunder and lightning. He also realized that it would be advantageous in battle if he could generate electricity from his body like the monster rats did. It was indeed an attractive power. He was snapped out of his musings by PZ, who once again asked if he would free him. Rakrak replied that he would, but he had a condition. He wanted to avoid accidentally spreading the power among the tribe. PZ flew up to Rakrak and asked if he wanted the power himself, didn't he? He understood such a desire. And suggested that it would probably be difficult, but still possible. However, there were a few things that would then be needed. In order for a single lizard to have this power, a ritual of the same level as magic would have to be prepared. But Rakrak shook his finger negatively, he didn't want to keep the power to himself alone. Rakrak recalled that he had said that the power of electric demonic magic spread indiscriminately, but if necessary, one person could take possession of it with a ritual. If both of those statements were true, then couldn't the power also not be distributed indiscriminately, but distributed to certain select people? PZ looked puzzled. He replied that he hadn't tried it, but he thought it was possible. Such a small ritual should work, but why did Rakrak need it? If he wasn't going to take all the power for himself, the result would be about the same as if he left it to chance. Then Rakrak explained, no, it's different. If the power is only given to certain members of the tribe, it will look as if they were chosen by God himself. In other words, it will not be a power of ancient evil that has no source, but a power with a clear source of origin. This one will look like a God-given power. But even that is not the most important thing. If the lizards think it's a gift from God, then it will be. What difference does it make? The chosen ones will think that God has given them strength, and their faith and devotion will reach God, even though they are gifts not from Him. From this their faith will be strengthened and they will be afraid to disobey their deity. PZ tried to contradict Rakrak, but couldn't think of what to say. What Rakrak was saying directly applied to the perished world system. If demonic magic holders believed that they had gotten it by chance, then accruing faith points would incur penalties. On the contrary, if demonic magic holders mistook it as a power given to them by a god, it would result in increased faith points. Rakrak decided to move on to the next condition. PZ was surprised at how many conditions he had and tried to resent it. But Rakrak reminded him that if he persisted, the conditions would only get more. Stingray had no choice but to agree, and he only asked him not to delay and just say the condition at last. However, Rakrak looked at him carefully and announced that he must also believe in their bug god. PZ was shocked at the suggestion. How could he, a demonic spirit, believe in their god? PZ flashed a look of denial. How could he believe in any god when he himself was descended from beings more ancient and powerful than the modern gods of this world? The rest of the terms were good, but it would be difficult. He reminded himself once again that he was a spirit of demonic magic that had been created from a being that had been around longer than the gods. Rakrak gave him a displeased look and reminded him that it doesn't matter who gave birth to you, how or why, what matters is what you are going to do next. And then asked if he wanted to be free or not. PZ still resisted, saying it was a ridiculous idea, because gods don't like demonic spirits. After all, they're just made that way, that's their nature. Demonic spirits compete with the gods and want to spread their demonic magic to as many creatures as possible, that's the purpose of their existence. Rakrak was starting to get angry and advised him not to compare his god to the others. And don't judge their god through the prism of your view of the world. He explained to the Stingray that he thought he was useful enough. And their bug god happens to be very generous and gracious to useful creatures. Their god might even listen to his wishes and fulfill them. That is why the reason why the Stingray was created is not important at all. The reason for its existence is determined by any intelligent creature itself, not the one who created it. Sunwon watched all of this closely. PZ steadily slowed his fluttering and hesitated in doubt. He knew very well that gods didn't like spirits of demonic magic and tried to destroy them. So he asked again, would their god really accept him? Rakrak was sure of it, and assured him that if he accepted all the conditions he offered him he would be accepted. Rakrak was sure that he did not know all the desires of his god, but he was the one who understood his desires better than any other being in this world. PZ was silent, but he had already made his decision. He looked at Rakrak and told him, the black-scaled lizard, finally the whole truth. He had indeed lied to him about some things. In fact, he's not just stuck in these ancient ruins, he rules them. The truth is that the challenger in these ruins must defeat the guardian of the ruins, but that guardian is under his rule. He controls everything in these ruins. And he is the one who sent the enchanted nutria with demonic magic to them, the lizardmen. Rakrak wasn't surprised at all. And PZ went on to say, the reason I told you is that you must defeat the guardian. But Rakrak didn't let him finish his sentence and finished it instead, saying that he knew why he said that, it was because the power shouldn't go to the weak because they wouldn't be able to spread it widely. He was right, recently even a tribe of frogmen had come to take up the challenge in search of power for revenge, but they had failed. But now PZ was wondering how Rakrak would react to all this. After all he had revealed his lies, wasn't he upset? Rakrak shook his head calmly as if nothing had happened. He had already expected this, and he wasn't the kind of lizard man who would get upset just because he had been deceived. After all, he hadn't even lost anything from this lie. PZ didn't understand what was going on. Then Rakrak said, I can always forgive if I want to. Forgiveness is not a warrior's virtue, but I am also a tribal leader. And forgiveness and reconciliation is indeed a necessary virtue for a tribal chief. All the more reason for such behavior, since he lives in a place as damp and dark as this and only has eyes for monster rats all the time. Rakrak thought that he could use some fresh air and looking at the beautiful things outside. Hearing this, PZ glowed with gratitude. Then PZ said, "I still don't know your name. What is your name?" The leader of the lizardmen fairly introduced himself. Hearing his name, PZ soared and announced that Rakrak had successfully passed the test. And he accepts all the terms he offered. Finally he asked if Rakrak agreed to the deal. Of course he agreed, but there was still one last question: would their bug's god accept the demonic spirit as his subordinate? A system window appeared in front of Sunwon that said that the demonic magic spirit wished to be subordinate to him. If he agreed, he would gain control over the domain of demonic magic, electricity. After a short time of thinking, Sunwon clicked yes. Now the deed was done. This was the only possible way to overcome the penalties of demonic magic due to the transfer of demonic magic to the realm of divinity. Otherwise, every creature possessing demonic magic would be labeled as enchanted with demonic magic and would be unable to produce the right amount of faith and control their power. However, demonic magic in the realm of divinity was under the control of a deity. Sunwon praised Rakrak for his good work. Thanks to him, once PZ accepted the terms of the deal, Sunwon was able to grant demonic magic to certain of his servants without penalty. Transferring it to the divinity realm doesn't make it divine, it can't even be developed like other abilities in the divinity realm. There are many restrictions, but not receiving penalties is already a victory, isn't it? If obtaining demonic power only required breaking through the ancient ruins, it would be too easy. Rakrak's group would win even if they were attacked by hundreds of monster rats, and Sunwon could always support them using points of faith. However, subduing a demonic magic spirit was much more difficult. Sunwon didn't even know if he would be able to do it. The only way to find out how successful they were was to wait and see what would happen depending on each character's abilities, and it seemed that Sunwon had gotten lucky again and succeeded by unlocking an area of demonic magic, electricity. However, Sunwon didn't consider it a mere coincidence, and it seems the fact that he met an injured Rakrak in the desert was luck for both of them. 9 years later. Near one of the altars to the nameless blue god of beetles, 2 figures stood on top of the hill. In front of them stood a tower of tombstones and water buffalo bones, stacked and assembled from plaster to build a structure tall enough to be seen from afar in the desert. This bone tower was built on top and was created by Rakrak. It served not only to demonstrate belief in the blue god of insects, but also as a landmark in the present day. After finishing telling the long story of how the blue bug god had given the legendary leader Rakrak the power of thunder and lightning, the black-clawed lizardman carefully wiped the dust off one of the stone monuments. This lizardman wore expensive layers of cloth called silk, indicating that he belonged to a high social class. The traveler only said enthusiastically, "Wow. That was an interesting story. But I have a question." When the lizard finished the story of how the chosen ones, with the power of lightning, had appeared among their tribe of black-cheeked lizards, and it was 9 years ago. The stranger asked what the bug god had to do with thunderstorms and lightning and how could he control these powers. The lizard man tilted his head, however, he did not seem discouraged by the question. Rather, he simply asked why this man was asking about such obvious things. He answered him very simply by pointing out what color lightning was. Since it was usually blue, it meant that it obeyed their blue beetle god. The man didn't quite understand what the lizard man meant and thought that lizards were always convincing the strangest things and they themselves were so strange. However, this human didn't think that being weird was necessarily a bad thing and hoped that he could take advantage of the fact that they were weird. Hiding his innermost thoughts, he asked the lizard, "Come to think of it, I didn't even recognize your name while I was listening to this long story." "My name is Y, and what is your name?" But the lizard was cunning and was in no hurry to answer. He interrupted their conversation by saying, "Wait, there seems to be some uninvited guests coming from over there." Where the lizard was pointing, a group of armed gnolls were coming up the hill. Gnolls. This hyena-like species had protruding muzzles and black spots on their brown bodies. They had a violent temper and were obsessed with power, so they often fought amongst themselves, but the general consensus amongst the perished world players was that despite these flaws, they were noteworthy. Their physical abilities and intelligence were on average high, so they were considered a good race to get at the beginning of the game, no matter how small the player's zone was. But these facts about the game had nothing to do with the lizard, which turned out to be Owen and the unknown man beside him. The man turned to Owen. "What are you going to do?" "As far as I know, the gnolls and lizardmen are not on the best of terms right now." Owen replied that there was still time before the top of the hill and they could think about what to do. They didn't even seem to have noticed they were being watched yet. The lizard asked the man if he thought they were Sawkaith's gnolls. Sawkaith was the leader of a tribe of gnolls, the tribe of severed ears, who were feuding with the black-cheeked lizardmen. These two tribes were the two largest tribes in the desert, so all the other smaller tribes showed great interest and respect for them. Sawkaith and Rakrak believed in different gods, and so the leaders of the two tribes inevitably feuded with each other. The man next to Owen was very interested in whether the two tribes were going to war, and if they were, who would win. No human tribe, at least in this wilderness, could compare to these two powerful tribes. But judging by the number of these gnolls and their armament, they didn't belong to the Salkaita tribe. They looked more like mere wanderers in search of sustenance. Owen noted that the man's arguments were well chosen and most likely true. He thought the same, but unfortunately he couldn't rely on guesses. He needed to know for sure, so he drew an arrow charged with electricity to find out after he had neutralized all the gnolls.